Hey, if you're new to surfing or stand-up paddle surfing and you're struggling to find good waves and you're wondering how everyone else finds good waves but you don't, and you don't quite understand it, this clip will be really beneficial to you. You might have seen surfers rushing around in early mornings staring down beaches like this big sandy beach here, and you wonder what they're looking for. Well, we're generally looking for sandbars or sandbanks. So in this clip we're going to talk about why we're looking for sandbanks, you know, how they assist our surfing, how they're formed, and I'm going to explain to you what could be causing you to miss a lot of waves, how I can help you get onto all of those waves and get into the right spot at the right time. So watch on, this will be really beneficial to all you beginners out there.
Sandbanks so important? Well, the reason why waves break is because they hit areas of shallow water. Okay, so when a swell comes in, or a set of swells comes in out of the deep ocean, as soon as it hits shallow water, they break, and you can see that along any beach. Now, this is important to surfing is because that's where the wave's got the most power when it breaks. So when you're on the shallow section, such as a sandbank or a reef, the wave comes in, it gains momentum, it stands right up, and when it gets to an area where the water's at that right depth, it topples over and breaks. So to catch a wave, you're best to get it right when it stands up on the sandbank, when it's just about to break, like this one over here, or after it's broken and it's white water. If you try and catch it this side of the bank or just wide of the bank in the deep water, it's not going to have enough momentum and you're just going to drop straight off the back. Now the wind's starting to come up a little bit, which is a little bit unfortunate. The conditions were perfect earlier, but now we've got a bit of an onshore breeze, and you can see what the wind does to the waves. It really lumps them up a bit, so we'll take a bit of an opportunity to have a look at that as well. But what I want to show you here is, as we've already established, waves break on the shallow water, and we're right on the side of a sandbank here. So whether it's a reef or a sandbank, the shallow water will cause the waves to break. Now, I just want to talk about one of the biggest problems I see beginner surfers and beginner stand-up paddle surfers have. They tend to look for the safety of what's called the shoulder of the wave, which is the deeper water around the sandbar. Now, waves won't break in this deeper water, and I can guarantee to you now that you will never catch a wave on that deeper water unless you're on a big touring board or a race board like I'm on now. You might be able to catch a bit of a swell, but on a standard surfboard or on an all-round stand-up paddleboard, you need to be right in there on that shallow water to catch a wave, because that's where the waves have got all the power. And I see it time and time again that beginners always waste, I'm not joking, maybe years paddling around out on the shoulder and not catching any waves. So what I'm telling you now, you need to really sacrifice yourself. Get in there, cop a few of those waves on the head, and you'll learn a hell of a lot quicker. You'll learn from your mistakes. The waves have got a lot more power. They'll be a hell of a lot easier to catch rather than fooling around out here on the shoulder. Now, just if you're going to go in there and catch a few waves, especially if you're on a stand-up paddleboard, these boards are really big and heavy. You've got to respect everyone in the water. If you hit somebody in the head with your board, you're going to cause them a hell of a lot of damage, or any part of their body for that matter, or yourself. So before you get out there, spend a lot of time in the lake, learn how to control the board, and you'll enjoy your surfing a lot better, and the people around you will enjoy your surfing a lot better. So rule number one is respect everybody in the water before you get out there.
Okay, so let's look at sandbanks in a little bit more detail. So if we're going to understand sandbanks properly and why we're looking for them, we need to understand what sort of waves we're looking for when we're surfing. So when you start out surfing, when you're a beginner or sup surfing, you generally just head out to any old beach, catch the nearest bit of white water and get a bit of a rush off it, without really knowing what you're looking for to get the perfect wave. So in this clip, I'm going to try and fast track you along and help you find a few good shaped waves by understanding sandbanks. So as you've probably all seen before when you're watching experienced surfers, they tend to look for waves that are breaking from left to right or from right to left, and this gives them a nice face where they can fly down the face and do big turns, okay? Now, we need special shaped beaches to create this shape of wave, and we need beaches that have good shaped sandbanks or some reef structure to create waves that break like that. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, I find, especially here on the south coast, and I've spent a bit of time on the west coast and on the east coast and in Victoria, the beaches hold better sandbanks in the wintertime. And the reason for this is because we get a lot more storm activity in the wintertime. This winter's been a bit of an exception. And when we get storm activity, which we have established in a previous clip about weather systems, when we get a low pressure system cruising past the coast, it brings stormy weather and big swells, and it's the big swells that break up our beaches and create the sandbanks, okay? In the summertime, we don't get so many strong weather systems, and the beaches don't get the broken up sand and don't create nicely shaped sandbanks. So hopefully that makes sense. So in the summertime, you'll hear people say all the beaches are pretty straight at the moment. And what they mean by this is, let's just say that's our beach. When we haven't had weather breaking up the sand on the beach, the sandbar will be pretty straight like that. So we've got swells coming in here into the beach from out to sea, out of the deep water, and as we established in my last little clip out on the water, we need shallow water for the waves to break. So when these swells hit this shallow water here of this sandbank, they all break and crash down in one big line along the whole beach. Now that's called closing out. You don't get any room to surf it left or right. The whole thing just breaks at once. And that's a very popular summer setup. You go down to the beach, the swell will be quite small, you'll have a very straight sandbank, and it'll just crash over all at once, and there's nowhere really to get a good ride unless you're out there just beginning catching whitewater, or you're out there splashing around on a boogie board with the kids. Okay, so let's have a look at winter. Now, how are sandbanks formed? Well, basically, they're a combination of a rip and a mound of sand, which is the sandbank, okay? So in the wintertime, we get storms and big swells pounding our beaches, and what that tends to do is it creates rips and sandbanks, okay? So what happens is when you're on a beach, you've got water pouring in from the swell, pouring in onto the beach, and as we've established in our tide clip, due to the gravitational forces on the earth, the tide is set at a certain level at certain periods of the day. So as the swell belts the water into the beach, the tide fights against it and tries to keep the water at that certain level. Otherwise the land would just get inundated with water, okay? So now, of course, we've got water pouring in on our beaches. The water has to go back out. When water travels back out, it tends to dig gutters, and you would have seen this on a road when it's raining. The water all tends to follow a path down the road or creates a gutter, and that's exactly what it does on our beach. So on this winter diagram here, we've got big swells here pounding the shore, and as the waves come in and pour onto the beach, the water has to funnel back out again to keep that equilibrium of the tide. So on this diagram here, this is our rip here. So the water's coming in and it's all sucking back out here in this gutter, and there might be another gutter further up the beach down here. Now, as all this sand pulls out through this gutter, it has to deposit somewhere, and in this diagram it's deposited here, and this is our sandbank. So it's created this nice shape in the sandbar, and what that shallow section there does, it creates the perfect angle for this wave to break. And you can see here I've sketched a really nice little barreling right-hander, and that's exactly what it'd do, because we've established that waves break on the shallow area, and the shoulder of the wave, or the safer unbroken section of the wave, is in this deeper water out here on the side of the bank. So as the day goes on, or the week or the month or however long the sandbank's there, this water keeps pulling in, so it'd keep coming in off the swell, pulling around and chewing out through this gutter. So this would be quite a dangerous rip here, pulling out to sea. But as a surfer, that's what we're looking for. So as I said in the very intro of this little video, why are surfers standing up the top looking up and down beaches? That's exactly what we're looking for. We're not just looking for sandbanks, we're looking for sandbanks with that perfect angle to get the perfect wave breaking off the side of it, okay? Now, I find the best beaches to look for sandbanks, beaches with a river mouth, because a river mouth naturally sort of causes this effect with the water running out, and it deposits a hell of a lot of sediment. So beside a river mouth you can get nice sand build-ups which create good waves. The other beaches are really exposed beaches that cop a lot of swell. They tend to have the really coarse, gritty sand on them. We all would have seen those beaches, and that gritty sand tends to get washed around and move a lot more, so they tend to bank up a lot more in the winter. The more sheltered bays have the finer white sand, and that tends to pack down and be more compressed, and it tends to be harder to shape up. So hopefully that makes sense. So we're looking for a nice exposed beach to the open swells. They're generally the ones with the big coarse sand, and we're looking for waves that are breaking in this sort of shape that I've got here. Now there are some other really important factors we need to consider with these sandbanks. Now you might find the perfect wave breaking on a beach and it just looks like heaven and so easy to surf, but there are a few catches involved. Of course, wherever we've got positives, we've got negatives. So let's have a look at some of the negatives. The first one is sandbanks can move around really quickly. So you might go to a beach in the morning and see the perfect wave breaking, and you'll think, I'll go and do my jobs and come back later. And you can come back later and it's completely changed. Now this can be because the sand has moved around and destroyed the whole setup, which happens quite regularly. Now this can happen over a day. The sandbank might stay there for a week. It might stay there for a month if you're really lucky. So you've just got to be ready to surf at any given moment. When that bank's on, you've got to be out there and into it. Now the next factor is tides. Tides affect sandbanks greatly. So let's just use this sandbank here for an example. So we've established that this is the sand area here. This is the deep channel, the rip. So we've got our rip out here again. Now, let's just say this wave's breaking perfectly, as we can see by this little diagram that I've drawn. Now, let's say that's low tide. Now, you may surf it like that in the morning on low tide and it's absolutely perfect, and come back 3 hours later on the mid tide, and it could be a completely different wave. It won't be as hollow because it's a bit deeper on the bank and it's got quite a bit deeper in the channel. So it might be still breaking quite reasonably, but it'll be quite a full wave or a fat wave, which means it's not throwing out, the lip's not throwing out as much, it's not as hollow, it's just a crumbling fat wave, okay? And we're probably aware of what I'm talking about there. Now, you may come down in the evening, like 3 hours later or mid-afternoon, and it's high tide, and the wave may not even be breaking anymore. It may be really deep now on the bank and super deep in the channel, and these swells are coming in and just rolling over that bank, okay? So the tide is really important. And once again, that's why we see the surfers standing up on headlands and in car parks looking down beaches, because firstly they're spotting the sandbank, then they're analysing in their head what the tide's doing, having a look at their phone at the tide forecast, as I showed you how to do in my tide clip, and in their mind they'll be working out at what time of the day that bank will be working at its best. But that all comes with experience, and that's what I'm trying to help you do here. Now, the last point I want to talk about is when you paddle out to surf one of these banks, even though it looks absolutely perfect from the beach, generally they can be really, really tricky to surf. And the reason is the amount of water that's moving around. And as we've established, we need a lot of water moving around to shape up the sand like that. So let's use this diagram as an example. We've got the rip pulling out here, making a nice gutter on the beach. Now, it doesn't always just flow perfectly out to sea. Like everything in life, everything varies a bit. So let's just say in this example, the rip's pulling out and pulling around the back of the wave like this and heading out to sea. Or it might be pulling across the beach like this. Rips can do anything. They're very, they vary and change quite a bit. So in this situation, we'd use this rip to paddle out. But of course, when you jump in this rip, it's going to suck you out to sea very quick, and it's going to try and pull you out like this, past this breaking wave, past the sandbank. So my suggestion to you is, if you're going to attempt to surf one of these waves, jump in the rip, head out. When you get to the point of the sandbank that you need to be, which is called the takeoff zone, where you need to take off on the wave, have a good look inland and pick yourself out a landmark, or before you even go out, set yourself up a stick on the beach that you can line yourself up with when you get out there, so you can tell if you're washing down the beach. So that's something we do all the time. When you get out there, sort yourself a landmark, just watch it for a while and work out what that current's doing. Otherwise, you're going to spend your whole day mucking around and you won't get any good waves. So, another good point is, if you're surfing this wave over and over again and it's breaking very heavy here along the sandbank and it's getting quite hard to get out the back, sometimes you can head down the sandbank this way. This will be broken water in here that's lost quite a bit of power because it's had time to peter out. You can wade out through this water, jump off the back of the bank this way and paddle over to the takeoff zone that way. You need to watch the bank break for a while, have a look how the water's moving, work out what's going to be the easiest way to surf it, because if you've got a huge swell breaking, you really need to utilise these rips or utilise a little jump off point on the sandbank to get out the back, okay? Especially if you're on a stand-up paddleboard. And what I'm going to do, hopefully in my next clip, when I get a bit of time, I'm going to take a sup down to the beach, hopefully when there's a fair bit of swell around, and we'll find a nice sandbank, and we'll do a bit of filming down there, and I'll film myself paddling out in a rip, and I'll show you exactly how to do it. So hopefully I haven't got too in depth here at the end, and you can still follow along if you're a beginner. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned to my further clips, and if you're on YouTube, please subscribe to this channel. Catch you next time.